if when you launch Bryce you're presented with this sort of view, then I recommend moving the camera around. So this is the perspective camera viewed from the director's camera, but we're not going to worry about the director's camera. In fact, this is the last time we're going to view anything through it in this tutorial. So using keyboard shortcut 2 will give us the overhead view, and I'm going to reposition the perspective camera by dragging and dropping it, and then using the edit menu and this rotation control to move it round so it's facing what I'm going to call north. And the reason for that is in the Skylab, if we use sky and fog control here, the sun rollerball is set up so that is north, south, east and west. I'm going to place it up here, and it's now in the northeast. Also on the create shelf, if we create a terrain, the height map that we'll see in the preview when we edit this terrain is also orientated so that it's north, south, east and west aligned. So if I now edit this terrain, which has come in, and that's the camera view, press 1 to get the camera view. There's the terrain. It's come in with the material applied at random, but we're not going to use that material, and we're not going to use it in its present shape. So edit to go into the terrain editor. I want to set it to solid. The reason for that is there's a problem with light getting through the back of the terrain through the bump material. We're going to use a bumpy material, so just set that to solid. It'll improve the appearance of the terrain when it's rendered. And I'm going to invert it using the invert control and erode it, because I want to create like a lake effect. So that's all the terrain editing we're going to do in this tutorial. We'll check out of there, and now if I just give that a quick render with the big green button there, you can see the terrain's in front of us somewhere. I'll move the camera up so you can get a better view of it. So that's going to be our lake, and the infinite plane, which is here, is going to be the water surface. So if I hold the control key down and click on this wireframe view, I've got a choice of whatever is underneath the mouse pointer. So I'm going to select plane, go into the material lab and go to the material library by clicking on this little arrow. And then this is in Pro Materials from this selection list. In the Pro Materials I'm going to select Water Surfaces and this Shallow Water material. So it's this material that is going to govern the impression of scale. So now you can see this is like ripples on the surface of a lake, and obviously this is going to be a pool, a really very small pool, if we leave it at this size. So what I need to do is select the terrain, switch to the overhead view. I can use this minus control to take us out. I'm going to enlarge this terrain so it's really quite big, and that will mean the camera is now inside our lake. So that's our view, and that's how things look having just enlarged it, which is not a very helpful view at the moment. So I'm going to widen the field of view of the camera with this little control there, that's that dot there, to get a bit more of the view in. And at the moment I'm tilted forward. I'm going to tilt back, so for compositional purposes I'm going to try and get the horizon. If you want to see the horizon, you can turn it on with this little control here. So that's where horizon is. I'm going to try and position it about a third of the way down the screen there. I'll just turn that off because it does tend to hide what's going off underneath in the wireframe. It chops everything off. And I'm going to move the terrain forward now because the camera's in the middle. So half the terrain is behind us. I'm going to move it forwards following this little preview here to the point where my camera is starting to interfere with the sides of the terrain. And then I'm going to just move my camera off to the left. I'm going to try and remember not to rotate my camera too far out from what I've called north. So what I need to do is scale the sides of the terrain so they're a little bit steeper. So I can hold the Alt key down and click on the resize tool and choose the Y-axis. That'll do both axes at once, so it goes down as much as it goes up. And then that's just giving me some steep sides. Load the terrain a little bit there, move the camera around. I don't want to get too bogged down in this setting up process, but it's important to have enough scale to give the impression of size to work with the lake material we've got here, and also that the haze should be interacting. So what we're going to be mostly looking at is lighting and using skies. So that's the key, and I'm just going to make the terrain a little bit larger so I get a bit more haze effect in there, and I'm going to rotate it slightly so that I'm over more water. That's the important thing. And that then, if I tilt the camera back so I get my horizon back where I wanted it, lower the camera down so that it's sort of looking like I'm on a boat or something like that. That's my setup. So having done that, I'll save that. So save as, and I'll call that Lake 1. If I add 1 at the end of the file name, next time I use save as, Bryce will automatically increment that file name to Lake 2, which is very handy. So if then I encounter a problem or crash Bryce, then I've got a previous version I can go straight back to. Once you've completed your scene, you can always delete all the developmental ones, but it is worth knowing that, and certainly until you're aware of what you might do that causes a problem, crashes Bryce, or is a move that you can't undo, it's worth saving regularly. Right, let's get on to the skies then, which is what this is all about. So this is a default sky, and it's a bit boring, so what we're going to do is pick out something from the sky library, and here in daytime there's these skies, and some of these that I made but quite a while ago, and one of the problems with that is they were designed with poorer performing computers in mind, with slower computers, and as a result they used cheating methods to create the effect of ambience. Ambient light is scattered light that's got into the shadow regions, and if you imagine if there was no ambient light in the world, then you would only see things that were directly lit by being straight in line with a light source. So it would create very stark, high contrast environments, but it doesn't work like that. But because the computers weren't powerful enough to simulate that, and we didn't have a fully functional true ambience effect, then I won't go into that, but Bryce can simulate the light scattering through using a light gathering process. But then it was necessary to have cheating ways to create the effect of ambience, which I'll now show you, and then I'll show you how to get around them. So this first sky, we'll give that a quick render. Doesn't render very quickly. Now that's my fault, because if you go into the sky and fog and go into this little control here, that gives you the Skylab, I set soft shadows, and that wasn't really a very wise thing to do to save in a sky that could just be picked out at random, because it means unless you're aware of where this control is, that you'll think this is oddly slow. It's also got 150 shadow softness, which isn't possible to set. That's a bug, and that's probably because it's come from an older version of Bryce. So if you see shadow softness, until you really know you want to use that effect, turn it off, and that will improve the render time. I'll just show you that now. It's going to render a lot faster. See? Okay, so back in the Skylab, the next thing to consider is this shadow intensity control. This lets light travel through solid objects, but that's not good anymore. That's a bad idea. That's another way of letting light through to make sure you didn't get such dark shadows. And this control, although it says sun and moon shadows, works for all direct lighting shadows. So the only thing that doesn't affect is to ambient shadows. Otherwise, that needs to be set at 100 so that you get all the light stopping at the solid surface. Light travelling through solid surfaces, not a good thing for light simulation. As I say, in the past you had to do that because the computers weren't fast enough to do the light simulation. So set that at 100 no matter what. What else have we got then? Well, if we look at our scene, now you can see these areas are quite dark, but there's still some light here and some light down here, and that's being caused by the fog and the haze. To turn those off, hold the Alt key down, click on the fog, hold the Alt key down, click on the haze, and now you can see it's fully dark. However, we haven't chosen the material for the train, and some materials have ambient response, and this again is another way of creating the illusion of ambient light. That we're going to not create the illusion of ambient light, we're going to create better lighting. But before that, you need to know what the pitfalls are of having bad lighting. This is something that's taken me a long time to learn. So here we go. In the material lab for this terrain selected, click M for the material lab, and we're going to pick out from Pro Materials again, LPAC 1 low altitude mountain lake. That's just there. And this, if you look in the material setting, has an ambience setting, and the byproduct of this is if there is any global ambience, it will respond to it. And now you can see the train's lit up on its own, and we don't want that. So here's the global ambient control. If that's set to fully black, the ambient won't respond, and we're back to where we were before. So that's all very well. Last thing we can cut out, we can disable the sunlight, and link sun to view is another thing where I've learnt that you don't want to use it, because that allows the rollerball to function as I was suggesting, north, south, east, west. If you do link sun to view, it then becomes north, south, east, west according to the camera's position, and as you move the camera around, the sun will track. So if we place it in the north and then rotate the camera around to the east, it'll still be north as far as the camera is concerned in front of the camera, but east as far as the world space is concerned, which always gets me confused. So turn off link sun to view. There's one other thing that might also be introducing light. In this case with this sky, I know it's not, but I'll show you where it is, and that's this sky dome colour. So if we choose something radical for that, like a horrible garish green, you can now see that the train is lit again, and this operates as a light directly above the scene, pointing down at the ground. It doesn't cast shadows, but it does interact with the bump effect on the material, so the material's going to look bumpy. And but again, this was a cheating way of adding light. So if you've got all the ways of adding light in your scene, you can't really, like if you've got loads of haze or fog and that kind of thing, and ambient, let's make that purple, then it's difficult to get to grips with your scene. You might be presented with this, think, well, why can't I see the ground? That's because of the fog. And if the haze is too thick, you can lose track of things in the distance as well. So you need to strip things back so that everything's nice and dark to start with, and then add the light in a bit at a time. So we'll go through that again because it is an important step. So we'll pick another sky out. In fact, well, I'm going to pick this one, right, thermal, because that one's got some sky dome. So here we are with thermal. That doesn't look too bad as a starting gambit, but we want more control. We want to understand what we're doing. So we'll go into the Skylab and we'll check there's no soft shadows. That's fine. The intensity is what, 100. This is a good start. Go back out. You will knock out the haze by holding the Alt key down and clicking that, and then holding the Alt key down and clicking on fog will turn those off. Now this is lit. Could that be lit by the sun? Well, we can just turn the sun off temporarily. That's fine. And we're still getting some light, so there's some ambient colour. So hold the Alt key down, click on the colour swatch, and you can set that to fully black. Try again. We're still getting some light. Okay, that's coming from sky dome colour. Hold the Alt key down and set that to fully black. What we're trying to do is get to a stage where we've got no light arriving, and then we can control the lighting environment. Right, let's get onto the sky we're going to use for this, and that's this Utah blue. Right, we'll just give that a render as it is. Now the same theory applies. What we want to do is go into the Skylab, and we can see it's got link sun to view. I don't want that. In fact, I'm going to disable the sun now, so we can eliminate that from our process. Here, shadow intensity is nearly 100, but not quite. It wants to be 100. Any light it's letting through is going to slow the render down. So that's that stage. I'm also going to turn the sun and moon off as a visible object at this point while I think about it, because this is the sky we're going to generate our light from, and to do that I'm going to use image-based lighting. And again, this is a step that we can take now, but I'm not going to use the light. So I use HDRI image. Sky dome only means I just create light sources in the top half of the sky. Use sky, generate it, lower the quality. This light bit at the edge there is probably being caused by the haze, but most of the sky is dark blue. And then I'm going to set the output of the specular channel and the HDRI effect to 0. So it's not going to add any light, and you can see the sun's still disabled. That's good. So we'll just check out of there, and I'm going to render my scene. You can see I've still got some light arriving from somewhere, so I'll check the sky dome colour, hold the Alt key down, click on the colour swatch. Yep, definitely want that at 0. And then I'm going to see the global ambient colour. I can see that's there, so I'm going to set that to 0. So now my landscape's nice and dark, but there's still some light here, so that's probably the haze, so I can knock that out. And I'll just check the fog. The fog is set. It's got some light in it, or dark in it, very little, and I don't know what it's set in, is 0, 0, so that's not interfering, but I can just knock that out to be certain. So we're now at the stage where the landscape's fully black, and then we can start adding stuff back in. So let's go into the Skylab and add some HDRI effect. Let's start with 50. Not very much, so let's try 200. Okay, that's providing me some light. It's quite blue. If it's a little bit too blue, I can reduce the saturation of the light arriving. It won't alter the appearance of the sky, and this isn't used as a backdrop. We're seeing the sky as it was set in the Skylab, not as a backdrop, which means that we can use the clouds and they'll look fine. If we'd captured the clouds into this sky, we'd need to use a very high resolution sky, but that's drifting slightly off topic there. So that's our bluish light arriving from the HDRI, and it's produced 16 simulated light sources. So if we just have a look at that, this is the equivalent of our ambient light. This is not light that's arrived from the sun, it's light that's arrived from the sky, and in theory light that's scattered off things around it in the environment. So we now add some sunlight by going into the Skylab and switching the sun back on. This is now going to be our key lighting, and we might want to increase the intensity of that. So I'll just go into the sun and moon and go to sun intensity, increase the diffuse, so it looks like the sunlight arriving here. If I can't see this preview, you need to select render in scene. So I'll just move the sun round so it's now, well, more or less in front of the camera, or it should be, but we can't see it. That's because it's been turned off as a visible object. If it had been on as a visible object when I created the HDRI, then it would have appeared in the HDRI image, and it would also have appeared as a light source, but I'm trying to separate the ambient light from the direct light, and so I didn't want another sun in the sky. It's easy enough to show you that because it's a quick process. If I use sky now, there you go, the sun's in the sky, and there will be light sources created associated with that light. So that would mean that if I move the sun, it would be like there were two suns in the sky, the one generated from this light source and the one generated from the sun. You'll see it's been turned off automatically as a result of generating the HDRI image. So go back into sun and moon. I'll just get rid of it as a visible object. Image-based lighting, use sky. That's sorted it out, and I've no longer got the haze in this either, so it's just very straightforward bluish light arriving from the sky. I'll turn the sun back on now, but if I want a sun glow effect and the sun as an object in the sky, I need to turn it back on as a visible object. So what I'm aiming for here is the sun just slightly off to one side, so it's creating a bit of a gradient of light, and it's leaving one half of the scene in shadow and illuminating one half of the scene. So I'm getting some effect of the light in the scene. I've got a bit of a shadow along that edge there, you can see now. So having set that up, let's have a look how that looks in our scene. Okay, we've got the light is as appropriate level. We've got some light in the ambient area, but at the moment there's no real sense of depth, and that's where haze can come in. So if I click on this control, that'll switch my haze back on, but it's only a very slight effect there you might be able to detect. So if I hold the left mouse button down and slide this along on that little thumbnail, that'll bring some haze in, but you can see it seems to be rather low down, rather like fog. You can lift it up with this control using the cloud height. So again, it's just hold the left mouse button down and lift it up, and that will now add a sense of depth, possibly a bit too much there. So I'll ease the haze effect back a bit and a bit more. It tends to be a bluish colour. This is called a colour perspective, and it's just to do with the frequencies of light that the atmosphere absorbs. So the best thing to do is you look at the effect, and then if you think you like it, half it, because you tend to adjust quite quickly to the amount of effect that you've added to your scene, and you tend to go a bit too far. So that's my haze effect added now, and then I want to add a bit of perhaps some fog over the water. So I'll just left click on the thumbnail, they'll reactivate it. I'll set the fog to the same colour as the haze, and then it's got a two-way control here, so you can control the height and the effect, and just try and adjust it so it's not too thick. It's a bit fiddly working with this control in this way. You get a bit of a readout in this bottom corner here, but it doesn't work in the most intuitive way. Sometimes it's better to go into the library itself. So go into the Skylab, the lab itself, and in atmosphere we've got direct control over the fine detail of the fog controls, and you get an extra control here. So sometimes it's easier just to work it from this menu. I'm struggling to get it to look like I want it to, really. I mean, I liked it in the other sky that we had a short while ago. What was that one called? Well, a risky thing to do if you're using very large diameter HDRI images, which is determined by, when we use the sky control here, the resolution, this is a small HDRI image, is to add them to the sky library. I've just recreated it, I didn't mean to. Just get back. And then go back, turn the sun, moon back on, and then re-enable the sunlight, so we're more or less back where we were. I can add this sky to the library. It's only got a small HDRI image, so I'll add it onto the end of the library there. That H indicates that it's got a HDRI associated with it. And then I'll go back to this sky where I was looking at the fog and I liked it. I'll go into atmosphere and I'll see what the fog settings are. So if that was the one with the fog on the ground. Oh, it wasn't. Oh, I wonder which one it was then. I just lift it up and it appeared. Oh. If I get it right in this sky, I can then go back and add it to the other one. See, the fog's come up so far there that it's actually acting a bit like haze, and you see it's working in a way with the terrain that's not very realistic. I can drop it down like that and it's just sort of hovering over the water. So if I get it right here, thickness, high, density, low, I can look at what the controls are. So 980, 11. Then I'll recover my sky that I was working on before from the library by going into the library using that little arrow there, and then I can set things up in a similar way. So I need more higher thickness but lower base height just to get my fog over the water. So it just looks like it's hugging the surface of the water there, something like that. And all these things add to a sense of scale, is the point. So as things are rendering now, I'd say there's nothing that's really very dark. So perhaps I've got too much light arriving from the sky in terms of the image-based lighting. So having set this up, I will now cut it back. So that allows me some contrast in the scene, but I'm still getting light into the shadow regions, but it's placing more emphasis on the sunlight now. So I'm getting to see the shape of the terrain more by the light coming in at a low angle. And this, I think, helps a lot with giving a good impression in your scene. This, you can see, looks rather featureless because it's not receiving the light, and this is a little bit better, but that bit's the best bit. So if in the final stages, when you're getting things set up, do experiment with moving the sun round to different positions and seeing what effects it brings out on your terrain. So you might find that you'd be better off lighting this side rather than that side, and still having the effect across on this far edge. So having the sun come in at a fairly low angle seems to help in this case. And if you leave too much in shadow, then this becomes quite featureless because it's receiving light evenly. What we've not got much of in the sky, it's quite a featureless sky, is cloud. Now this controls cloud frequency and amplitude, and it's another one where you can just left click on it and you can bring some cloud in by increasing the amplitude there. So that's brought some little bit of a cloud effect in there, and if you drag the other way you can sort of spread the clouds out. The cloud appearance is also affected by these controls, and but you know, I'll leave you to experiment with those. You can't really do any harm with those, and there's quite a lot of different effects you can get by just playing with the little thumbnails here of these controls. But the things to be aware of is the ones that affect lighting. The cloud won't affect lighting unless you capture them in the HDRI backdrop, which at that point, if the clouds are really white, they will start adding their own light like the sun would, but not at the same intensity. So a rather long-winded tutorial, and not intentionally so. That was just the fact that it's covered quite a lot of things, really. So I hope that was helpful to you. I'm still thinking this haze is a little bit intense with the fog. So if you can control it here, you have to just watch these controls on the left, and I'll set it down to a fraction of what it was, and that'll bring a bit more contrast into my scene. So we've got the impression of fairly strong sunlight and a little bit of fog and haze pushing this further back into the distance. try moving the camera in your final stages, you can always save the camera positions with these dots here. So if you find a position you think is going to be your render, you can save that position and then move your camera around different positions, modify the field of view, see what impression it gives. You might find that you've found somewhere that you like better, but you can always go back to where you were saved. So I just got under the water there. The nano preview at this point is very handy for this final bits of composition once you've got your effects set up. If you want to know what a little bit of the scene looks like and don't want to see the whole thing render, there's another control here, the plop render. When that's red, it's on. When it's not red, it's not off, and you can't select it. So click on that little button there. You can select an area to render and see what it's going to look like in the final render. So I'm going to call that it because I've gone on for far too long. I'll give that a final render. You can see it's going to take 1 minute 37. If you've got the sunlight passing close to you in the scene, then you might want to experiment with a little bit of soft shadows. But as you'll see, right, if we give it, I don't know, I'm having trouble with this control now. I think that's because I've loaded it from a sort of a buggy old sky. So if I set that at 15, which seems like an appropriate level, and render now, you'll see that the render time has gone up quite a lot. So that's 3 times the render time, but it'll affect the edge of this shadow here. Okay, right, I'll call that it now and let you get on with your own experiments.